I stepped out of the bathroom, my half-dry body chilled not from the air but from something else. Sticky. Unsettling. The towel was wrapped carelessly, my hair still damp, bare feet slapping against the tile. I always left the bathroom door slightly ajar. A childhood habit, nothing unusual. But this time, it became a problem. He was standing in the doorway. I didn't notice right away. I turned to the mirror to wring out my hair, and there he was, reflected behind me. Motionless like it was accidental. But he didn't move, and neither did I. Time froze for a few seconds, but my body reacted first. I grabbed the towel tighter and darted into my room. He vanished just as quickly as he'd appeared. I heard the fridge click in the kitchen, so maybe he was just passing by. I forced myself to believe that. But everything inside me rejected that version. Since then, things began to shift. Not abruptly, quietly, without any clear turning point. But every morning when I walked past him, something clicked in my mind. What if he was just standing there? And then, but what if he wasn't? There were three of us. Mom, a literature teacher. She lived in books and feelings, not always noticing what was happening nearby. Dad, owner of a restaurant, well known around town, cheerful, fit, respectable. To everyone, an ideal man. To me, for a long time, he was too. I grew up in care, in praise, in hugs. This house had always been safe. Which is why everything that started unfolding later became even more disturbing. When you grow up in warmth, even the slightest draft feels like a storm. Even if it's just a look. Even if it's just silence. I didn't tell Mom. What was there to say? He hadn't done anything, but I felt a discomfort in my body I couldn't explain. I stopped wearing short shorts around the house. I locked the bathroom door. I tried not to cross paths with him in the hallway. But the less I sought contact, the more he created it. He started asking more about my day, complimenting my outfits, sometimes bringing me sweets or my favorite berries. It could have just been fatherly affection. I clung to that thought, but something deep down protested. One day I went into his room to grab my charger. On his desk was a printed photo of me, not from a family album. Cropped, just me. Wearing the dress from my school performance a few weeks ago. He had been there. We'd taken family photos that day, so he kept a copy. For himself. Only me. I walked out without the charger. I couldn't tell myself. It means nothing. It meant something. I stopped sitting on his lap like I used to. It had seemed normal when I was younger, but now I was older and every touch felt wrong. Outwardly, nothing changed. We still ate together, watched TV, talked about the weather. But inside, I couldn't shake the unease. That's when I first asked myself, is it possible the boundaries we once had are starting to blur on purpose? And if I stay silent, does that mean I'm allowing it? Those thoughts were tormenting. I was ashamed of them. After all, he's my father, my family. I didn't want to destroy anything. But every time I caught his gaze, the kind I'd only ever seen from strange men, something inside me clenched. I didn't know how to react. I wasn't sure if it was really happening, or if I was just imagining things. Mistaking care for something else? I desperately wanted to be wrong. On the surface, nothing had changed. Breakfast was still at 8 o'clock sharp. Mom with her coffee and a book, Dad on his phone, me holding a piece of toast. The three of us. Everything was absurdly familiar, but something tense had slipped into the ordinary, like someone had stretched a string under the table and the slightest movement could snap it. He didn't look at me directly, but I could feel it. He was more attentive. He started remembering what I ate, what perfume I wore, which jeans looked best on me. One day, I came home to find a new jacket hanging in the hallway. No occasion. Mom said he bought it. Just because he saw it and thought of me. I would have been happy before. This time, I just nodded and tucked it away in the closet. I started fearing accidents. In the hallway when we brushed past each other. In the bathroom if I forgot to lock the door. Even my own reflection became dangerous. Everything that used to be harmless now felt loaded. I tried to act normal, but tension lived in every movement. He, on the other hand, became softer, almost flawless. Opened a gym account for me, suggested we go together. I declined, blamed it on school. He didn't insist, but I caught a flicker of disappointment on his face. Mom noticed nothing. She lived in her rhythm. School, books, lectures. In the evenings, she'd read by the window, like always. Sometimes she'd ask why I looked tired. I said I was swamped with college work. Partially true. Mostly I couldn't sleep, thoughts looping through my head at night. At some point, I started analyzing everything. Every detail. His footsteps in the house, the way he entered a room, how he sat next to me. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for him, just to see if anything had changed. That feeling was contradictory. I didn't want him near, and yet I waited for something to clarify it all. I started observing myself. How I reacted when he touched me. Accidentally. In passing. How my shoulders tensed. How I froze. I wouldn't let myself relax, but beneath the alertness there was another emotion. Guilt. As if the shift between us was somehow my fault. It was irrational. I knew that. I was the daughter. He was the adult. But still, deep down, I blamed myself. For not speaking up, for staying silent, for not stepping away sooner. The paradox was that, on the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Warm, close, almost cinematic. But inside, I felt the space between us shifting. Not drastically, not loudly, but slowly, millimeter by millimeter. And that's where the danger lay, in the gradual. I even tried to convince myself that I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into things, that maybe everything could still go back to normal if I just acted right. But the body doesn't lie. It remembers. It tenses before your mind catches up. And every morning I woke up with that pressure in my chest, a quiet reminder. Something's off. Maybe nothing had happened yet, but the feeling had already soaked into everything. Sometimes I watched others, at school, in cafes, at the park, girls, their parents. And I wondered, do they feel this too? Or is it just me? Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I ruined it myself. I was searching for a way out, but all I found were more questions. I didn't expect that evening to be anything special. It started out like any other. A school event. The certificate ceremony, the stage, the music, the usual chaos. Mom sat in the front row with her camera. Dad was further back, lingering in the shadows. He always said he didn't like being the center of attention. Everything followed the script, until it fell apart backstage. After the show, I went to change. In the narrow hallway behind the stage, it smelled of dust and old curtains. I was adjusting my dress when he suddenly appeared beside me. I flinched. I hadn't expected it. He stepped in too close, said something about how proud he was of me. Then he placed his hand on my shoulder. He left it there for too long. Not like a father. His fingers tightened slightly, too much, and then slid just a little lower. My heart stopped. I froze. Didn't move, didn't even breathe. He was standing right next to me. And then, out of nowhere, his lips touched my cheek. Quick, almost like a gesture of support. But I knew it wasn't simple. He didn't wait for a response. He just turned and walked away. I stood in the dim hallway, my back pressed against the wall like I was trying to lean on something solid. My face was burning. My ears were ringing. It felt like everything had changed in that single second. Was it a mistake? An accident? Or something intentional? I didn't tell Mom. I didn't tell my friend either. At first, I tried to convince myself he was just confused, didn't think it through. But my body told me the truth. I was shaking. That touch replayed in my mind again and again. That night, I locked myself in my room and stared at the ceiling. Silent. Waves of guilt crashing over me. I didn't feel disgust. And that frightened me most of all. There was something disturbingly magnetic about that moment. And that's what made the whole situation dangerous. Because the emotions in my head didn't match how my body reacted. I couldn't tell where fear ended and interest began. Or the other way around. The next morning, I acted like nothing happened. But his gaze had changed. He didn't touch me, didn't come close. But something between us had shifted. We both felt it. The silence between us was heavy, like the air before a storm, louder than any words. I was scared it would happen again. And at the same time, scared that it wouldn't. That contradiction was eating me alive. I kept wondering if I had provoked it somehow. Maybe I should have stepped back, said something, done anything. But I didn't. I just stood there and let it happen. I still don't know why. I started watching him, his hands, his movements, studying myself too. I couldn't afford to be careless anymore. Every gesture, every glance felt like a warning. And I wasn't a daughter in the usual sense anymore. I felt it, in my body, in the way I moved, in the way I held my breath. It felt like the world had started to split at the seams, and no one saw it. No one but me. Mom left for a work trip, just a regular teacher's seminar, 3 days. I stood in the hallway watching her suitcase disappear into the taxi. She smiled, kissed my cheek, reminded me to eat dinner. Everything felt normal, but the moment the door closed, the house changed. It was like someone removed a filter. What remained was silence, deep, uneasy, almost personal. It was just the two of us now. And it didn't feel like family. It felt like the unknown. The first evening passed quietly, almost too quietly. He made dinner, pasta with the sauce I used to love, played jazz, poured wine. I avoided his eyes. Outwardly, everything seemed normal, but inside everything was tight, pulled like a wire. As if this wasn't dinner, but a rehearsal for something that had already begun, even if it hadn't fully shown itself yet. He was gentle, attentive, asked about my day, my plans, how I was feeling. I kept my answers short. It felt like saying too much would give him a reason. But maybe reasons no longer mattered. The second day, I woke up early. The house was too quiet. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, just listening. Was he coming? Were there footsteps? Was the doorknob turning? Nothing. Only my own breath, heavy like after a sprint. I left for the gym, stayed out as long as I could, then went to a cafe with my laptop. I simply couldn't be in the house. Every sound reminded me of that hallway behind the stage, of that touch, of the look in his eyes that had changed since then. I didn't want to admit I was afraid, but I was. That evening, I came back late. He was in the living room, holding a book. The TV murmured in the background. When I entered, he looked up and stood, asked if I'd eaten. I nodded and went straight to my room. Didn't even take off my coat. Didn't turn on the light. Just sat on the bed in the dark. I was shaking. On the third day, he suggested we go out of town, get some air, like we used to. I declined, said I had work to do. He didn't insist, but his eyes lingered. That look again. I recognized it now. Too focused, as if waiting. And I realized I couldn't spend another night in that house. I texted a friend, told her I needed to stay over, lied, said I'd had a fight with Mom. I didn't want to explain. She didn't ask questions. When I walked out with my backpack, he was in the hallway, watching, silent. Just nodded. I closed the door behind me and only then realized I was finally breathing. Really breathing. Those 3 days were filled with silence. But not peaceful silence. It was tension. A pause before something could happen. If I stayed. I felt it. Everything was sliding somewhere it shouldn't, and each day in that quiet brought it closer. But I still said nothing, and neither did he. I opened the door, and immediately smelled it. Food, wine, spices, something too familiar, too well prepared, too out of place. In the living room, soft music played, the kind from my childhood. Slow chords, comforting, almost nostalgic. He stood by the table wearing the shirt he usually saved for family celebrations. The table was set for two. Candles, napkins, a bottle of red. My favorite olives. I froze in the doorway. He turned and said it was just a dinner. For the two of us. No special reason. Just time together. My chest tightened. It was too much. Too thoughtful. Too calculated. And too late to pretend it meant nothing. This wasn't about family. It was about something else. I didn't know what to do. Leave? Say I wasn't feeling well? But my legs didn't move. Everything inside me paused. I sat down, silently, just to avoid questions. He poured wine, pushed a plate toward me, talked about the city, work, the weather. I heard none of it. I stared at my food and counted my heartbeats. He laughed, recalling how I used to eat pasta with my hands, how I'd hide toys under my pillow, how I was scared of the dark. I remembered too. Only now the fear felt different. The darkness wasn't in the room anymore. It was inside me. I realized this wasn't just dinner. It was a performance, an imitation of closeness, not the father-daughter kind. The room was soft and warm, but it didn't feel safe. He didn't cross any clear lines, but everything, candles, music, his voice, was saying what he wouldn't. He looked too long, smiled too warmly. And when our hands brushed, I didn't pull away. I just sat there. I didn't know who I was in that moment. A daughter? A woman? A mistake? Afterward, we quietly cleared the table. He stayed in the kitchen. I went to my room. But 10 minutes later, he knocked. Said he forgot to give me some chocolate, my favorite. I opened the door, and he stood there. Too close. Looking at me just a little too long. That's when I knew. It would happen again. Some evening, some moment. He would try. Not suddenly. Not directly. The same way he always did. Through dinners, glances, touches. Through no big deal. I felt the panic rise. But I couldn't say no. I didn't know how. I was afraid to disturb the fragile balance. I didn't even know what I feared more. That he'd back away, or that he wouldn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listened to every sound, heard him in the kitchen, pouring water, turning off the lights. Then, nothing. Silence. And I lay there in the dark, feeling like something inside me had changed. Like someone else was living under my skin now. Someone who couldn't think simply anymore. I couldn't hide behind old roles. Not anymore. Something inside had already shifted. And I knew. The moment was coming when I wouldn't step back. Or wouldn't want to. I don't remember how that evening started. I only remember the feeling. Like everything was repeating itself, looping in a closed circle. It was just the two of us again. Mom's trip had been extended. I'd stopped counting the days. Every evening with him felt equally dangerous and equally quiet. He made dinner again. I didn't speak. Sat down automatically. I wasn't agreeing. I was just tired of resisting something I couldn't even name out loud. The wine poured into glasses. The same music played. His eyes, the same as always. Inside, everything felt muted. No thoughts. Just my body, remembering on its own what usually followed. He spoke softly, told stories from the past, laughed. I didn't respond, just listened. I felt like if I said even one word, it would be taken as permission. But even my silence felt like an answer. When dinner ended, I stood up to leave. He stepped closer. Too close. Again. I didn't step back. He looked at me for a long time. There was no uncertainty left in his eyes. He leaned in, not touching, like he was waiting. I could have turned away, but I didn't. He pressed his lips to my cheek, like before, but slower, warmer. I froze. Everything inside tightened, not from fear, but from the realization that this was really happening. Not a memory, not imagination, not an accident. It was real. I don't know who moved first. I just remember how we ended up closer, face to face, and how his lips found mine. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't gentle either. It was a kiss I didn't pull away from. I didn't return it. But I didn't stop it. It lasted a second, maybe two. Then, he stepped back. We looked at each other. No words, no explanations, just silence. But in that silence, more had been said than either of us could take back. I walked to my room, locked the door, sat down on the floor. I wasn't shaking. I didn't feel sick. And that scared me. I didn't feel like a victim. But I didn't feel right either. I just existed, in a space without a name. It wasn't violence. It wasn't forced. It all happened in a gray area where neither yes nor no had been spoken. Only mutual silence. And a step neither of us stopped. I sat there on the floor wondering, what if Mom had been home? Would that have made things easier? Or harder? But I realized it didn't matter anymore. What had happened between us couldn't be erased, couldn't be undone. It was just a kiss. But behind it stood everything that should never have been. It split my life into a before and an after, and there was no way back. I heard her key in the lock, and everything inside me collapsed. Mom wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow. I'd already made a plan. How to be myself again, how to hide the traces of someone else's presence in my mind. But time didn't ask permission. She entered quietly, left her suitcase by the wall. I stood frozen in the hallway like caught in a dream. Dad came out of the kitchen holding 2 wine glasses. We weren't expecting her. We weren't expecting reality. He stopped mid-step. She froze too, looked at both of us. And suddenly she became too calm. No shouting, no questions, just a long, focused stare. She understood everything, without a single word. I felt my skin tighten with shame. We were clothed, standing apart, nothing obvious. But she didn't see what was on the surface. She saw what lingered in the air. Plates still on the table. 2 glasses. Candles. His dress shirt. My eyes. Everything looked too intimate to be a family moment. She walked past us, silently, took a bottle of water from the kitchen, sat in the armchair, as if nothing had happened. But that silence was the worst part. She wasn't trying to investigate. She already knew. Everything we hadn't said, she read between the lines. That night we ate together, all 3 of us. I couldn't taste anything. Dad tried to make small jokes. Mom smiled politely. It felt like we were performing a play we all knew by heart, only the ending had changed. After dinner, I went to my room and lay down fully dressed. I left the light on. I was tired of being afraid of the dark. Now the light scared me. It made everything too visible. That night, I didn't hear footsteps. No one came into my room. But I knew. Everything was already broken. A crack had opened in the middle of the family, and it was spreading. We didn't talk. We just waited. For someone to speak. For someone to leave. For someone to pretend it never happened. In the morning, Mom acted like always. Breakfast, tea, news playing on TV. But her hands trembled when she poured water. She didn't ask anything, and I offered no explanation. I felt like I was being torn apart. I wanted to drop to my knees and confess everything. But my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. Fear was stronger than truth. Dad acted like he had control. Calm, composed. But I knew. He was waiting. For her to speak. For me to speak. For someone to decide for him. We lived under one roof like strangers. Every day felt like slow motion. I no longer sensed time. Just waiting. And shame that had sunk deep into my skin. It wasn't a storm. It was the pause after impact. and none of us knew how to take the next step. One day, she just didn't come home. No call, no note, no "I'll be late," just absence. The evening passed in waiting, then in worry, then in quiet acceptance. The next morning, I noticed her suitcase was gone. Dad said she'd gone away to visit relatives, to rest, recharge. But I knew it wasn't a vacation, it was withdrawal. He pretended everything was under control. Morning coffee, newspaper, dinner at night. He kept living in a version of normal that no longer existed, and I shut down. I couldn't be in that house anymore. Every object reminded me of that night, that look, that kiss, of what we didn't stop, of what she saw but never spoke of. I no longer felt like a daughter. I just existed next to someone connected to me by too much silence. We barely spoke, yet we were together every day. He started cooking again, placed my cup on the table, turned on the music. He tried to return to the us that had become a lie. I kept waiting. Would there be a conversation? A confession? Condemnation? Forgiveness? Nothing. He no longer came too close. No lingering looks, no touches, but no remorse either. It felt like he was simply waiting for everything to fade, for the moment he could try again, for me not to walk away. I began losing myself. My body felt numb, my sleep broken. I tried to study, to read, to talk to friends, but it all felt hollow. Inside me, a scorched field, not even tears left. I realized I couldn't exist between them. Mom had vanished, but hadn't truly left. She was observing from a distance. That was her way of surviving. And I was stuck in between what was and what never should have been. A week later, she called, asked if everything was okay. I lied, said it was quiet, that I was studying, that Dad was taking care of me. Her voice was calm, but I heard it. She knew. She just couldn't come back. That night, I stared out the window for hours. Saw someone walking a dog. Saw lights turn off in the building across the street. Cars passed by, unaware that inside this house something was collapsing. And that's when I understood. We would never be father and daughter again, even if it all stopped. Even if he apologized. Even if I ran away. It already happened. The bond was broken, and it couldn't be repaired. I packed a bag. No plan. No words. No thoughts. I just knew. If I stayed, I would vanish completely. And if I left, it would hurt. But there would be a chance. Any chance. For quiet. The real kind. Without fear. I left in the morning, early, before he woke up. The house was dark, like it was still breathing in its sleep. I didn't slam the door. Just closed it gently. Left the key on the windowsill. It was cold outside, but inside, I felt empty. Not hurting. Not afraid. Just hollow. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked. With my backpack, with a shadow behind me, with a body that finally felt like it belonged to me again. At first, I stayed with a friend. She didn't ask questions. Her family welcomed me like I was just visiting. But even in that warmth, I felt like I didn't belong. Like something inside me still didn't match the outside world. I tried to speak, wrote long messages. To myself, to my mom, to drafts I never sent. Deleted them, started over. There were too many words, and none of them fit. How do you explain that you've broken without breaking someone else? Mom texted after a few days. Just one line. "Where are you?" I replied, "Safe." She didn't ask anything more. But I knew. She felt it all. We were alike. We both chose silence as a way to survive. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. I signed up for therapy. For the first time. I thought it meant weakness. But it turned out to be the only way to survive. Speaking didn't mean betrayal. It meant finally stopping the betrayal of myself. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want drama. I just wanted to live. To feel again. The street. The taste of food. Books. My own skin. I wanted to breathe without fear. To wake up without the feeling that someone was watching. I wanted to return to a life without hidden rooms and heavy stares behind my back. A few months passed. I rented a small room, started school again. Slowly. One step a day. Sometimes it all comes back. Memories, smells, tiny details. I'm learning not to run from them, but to see them. Without judgment. Without guilt. I don't speak to my father. He hasn't tried to find me. That's his choice. And my boundary. We both know there's nothing left between us. No words, no rights, no memories worth keeping. Mom came back home. I know because she started texting again. Sometimes just a photo, a cup of tea, a cat on the windowsill. It's her way of saying, I'm here if you ever decide. Sometimes it feels like none of it happened to me. Like I'm watching a film and I can just turn it off. But then I see myself in the mirror. Slightly older, a little quieter. I'm different now. Not weaker, just more clear. I don't know how to forgive, or if it's even necessary. But I know this. Boundaries aren't about rules. They're about respect. About not losing yourself, even if it means losing others. Leaving wasn't running away. It was a choice. I chose quiet. The kind where I could finally hear myself again. And that was enough.